Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you listen to this podcast. Hope you are all having a good time. I am your host, Keith, and I am back today chatting with Jake. Hello, Jake.
Hello, Keith. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So, a couple of weeks ago, I did my top 5, which was actually top 6, top bucket list trips. Last week, we were chatting with Dave, and Dave went over his top 5 bucket list trips. And before we get into the chat with Jake, I just want to say a quick hello to Dave's mum, who listened to her first podcast this week. And obviously, as you're aware, if you listened to Dave's podcast last week, Dave is 71. So I won't give away Dave's mum's age, but from those figures, you can probably work it out. So welcome to the podcast world. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you keep listening to future episodes of the Bucket Lister podcast. But today we're going to be chatting with Jake and hearing about his top 5 bucket list trips that he has been on with us at the Bucket List Company. So how easy was it, Jake, to come up with the list?
It really, really wasn't. I hate it when people say, like, what's your favorite trip? What's your top 3 trips or anything like that? Because I always find it really hard to choose. I've started phrasing it like this. So on the last trip, I had somebody say to me, what's your favorite trip to go on? And I said to them, have you got children? And they said, yes. And I said, well, which one's your favorite? It's the only way that I can explain. I mean, some of them come back with an answer straight away, but others kind of get that it's a little bit more complicated. And I like them all for different reasons. But I have managed to settle on 5 top trips. But if you ask me again next week, there might be some others that I would put in there as well.
Yeah, it is really difficult. And I know when I was writing my list, and hence why I cheated, because it's my podcast and I can have 6 and no one else can. But it was very difficult. And I kind of put one in and then you'd have to take one out. And which one would you take out? And then the order would change. And it was just, and like you say, it's very difficult because each trip is different for a different reason. And yeah, it wasn't an easy topic. And I know Dave struggled last week, and your list might even change as you're going through them in a minute as we start chatting. So
yeah, quite possibly. And that's the thing. The more that I do, the more it changes. Like, my bucket list was so small in comparison to what it is now when I first started kind of thinking about it. But I've found out about places that I didn't even know existed through working in this world. And it's, people keep coming up with really good suggestions of, this is on my bucket list. I go, that sounds amazing. That's now on mine. So my list has just gotten longer and longer the more I've been doing.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, like, when you look at the 48 different trips that we offer, like, there isn't one that I wouldn't go on. Like, so how do you bring that list down to 5? And we're constantly adding more and more to it. And kind of, there's trips this year that, like, I haven't been to Peru this year. So kind of Peru's drifted to the back of my mind a little bit. And the trips that I've run this year have come more to the front of my mind. And so I think it is really difficult, like, to kind of pin it down to just 5. But we're going to do it anyway. We're going to try and do it. We're going to hear Jake's top 5 bucket list trips. So take it away, Jake, with your number 5.
Oh, okay. So there is an order. Well, number 5 for me, if we were going in that order, I would say was India. So I got the chance to go to India in January of this year. We went on our India Himalaya adventure. So it was the first time we'd run that trip. So it was really exciting to be a part of that and get to go out as kind of like the first trip. Had some brilliant people on that trip. So it was brilliant from that perspective. But it's made its way onto the top 5 slot just because India is always one of those places that people talk about as somewhere that you should go to. And quite often it gets referred to as Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. typically I am sitting on the fence a little bit. There were some things that I didn't like so much, but then there were some things that I really, really loved. But getting to experience everything that India has to offer in the sense of Delhi and the mountains and that kind of thing, and seeing the Taj Mahal puts it at number 5 on my top 5 bucket list trips. And I think the Taj Mahal being so iconic as a bucket list item for so many people, that's why it ends up definitely going on the list. But the way that we do the trip in India, I think that's really important. Like the Taj Mahal might not necessarily make its way independently, but with everything thrown into the trip on the whole, that's why I would say it earns a spot.
I think India is very similar to Nepal in terms of a destination. Like some people love the hustle and bustle of Kathmandu. Some people cannot wait to get out of Kathmandu, but love Nepal as a country and just see that landing in Kathmandu is, part of the experience, and almost it's a must because you have to be in Kathmandu to start your adventure. And I imagine Delhi would be the same for quite a lot of people. You either love it or you hate it, but actually it's kind of one of those things that you just need to do to experience the rest of it.
Yeah, so Delhi was not my favorite part. It was a really interesting experience, and it was fantastic from the sense of like being able to explore, such iconic places in Delhi. And we went on a city tour and we did the rickshaw ride, going through. That was terrifying, but also amazing. I've never minded the hustle and bustle of Kathmandu or Marrakesh. Like those are 2 places that I actually feel quite relaxed when we're driving through, and lots of people find that a bit much. India was another level, but then that was also quite cool. But for me, it was really interesting to see all of that in Delhi and get the sounds and the smells and go through the food markets as well. But then coming away into the mountains and just getting to see an entirely different part of India. That was incredible. And the reason, again, I think why that trip has made it into my top 5 is because there were so many individual bucket list tick offs that I got to do in India. So for one trip, being able to go whitewater rafting down the Ganges, getting to zip line through the jungle, seeing a tiger, which I know that really annoys you.
All right, shut up. Yeah. We'll skip by that bit.
But getting to see a tiger, that was incredible. And then getting to see the Taj Mahal. That's 4 really big individual bucket list tick offs for a lot of people in one trip.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, it's a different itinerary, I think, as well, to a lot of trips that are offered to India as well, isn't it? It's not the standard tourist India itinerary that you see on other India trips, is it?
No, so it was something that the people who came with us had mentioned, is that they hadn't found anything similar when they were looking for ways to travel India. One of the things that is really popular, and we may look at doing, I know that I've had conversations with you, is the Golden Triangle. But the way that we ran this India trip was that you do spend limited time in the cities, because it's not really a city tour. It's not, we don't really take you to India and you explore cities. It's about getting out of Delhi after experiencing it and going into the Himalayas. Very similar to Nepal in that sense. It's about learning kind of the culture around the people who live in the mountains, and learning more about like the religion. I think that was really interesting. We got to see quite a lot about see and learn quite a lot about the religion. We did some yoga. I'm still the least flexible person.
You know me. I love my yoga.
But yeah, I mean, you were talking about the yoga on our surf and yoga trip that you went on. Was that this year or last year?
No, last year I did it. I haven't been this year.
Last year. But for a lot of people, if you are into your yoga, and Keith, now that you've done a little bit more of it, actually getting to do it in the birthplace of yoga is for a lot of people, that's a huge bucket list tick off. So on the whole, India is just an incredible place to achieve quite a lot in a short space of time. But being able to be by the Ganges, up in the mountains, was really quite peaceful and calming, having just come out of Delhi. So it was, and then the trip to Agra to go to the Taj Mahal, that was done really, really well. And we actually timed it so that we visited on the day of Shah Jahan's death, who was I believe it was the architect who built the Taj Mahal. It was the day that he died, or he might have been. No, I think he was the ruler who commissioned the Taj Mahal to be done. But anyway, the tomb that is normally closed off, which is underneath, it's closed off for 364 days of the year. And one day of the year, on the anniversary of his death, you're allowed to actually go into the tomb below. Whereas above, they just have replicas. So every other day of the year, you just walk around the replicas. But we were able to go down and experience the real tombs. That was good.
Amazing. Okay, then. So number 4 on your list. What makes number 4?
Well, number 4, and to be fair, having just spoken about how amazing India was, I may have wanted to swap that to number 5. But number 4 is Gozo, and I just got back from Gozo, and again, that's actually something that we were talking about at the beginning. Is the more trips you do, the more this list chops and changes with these experiences. But scuba diving in Malta, we go to the island of Gozo, and we spend some time scuba diving. I got to learn to scuba dive with a group whilst we were out there. But that firmly cemented itself in place of being in the top 5 for me, just because I think that scuba diving is something that everybody should learn to do. And I think that is such a bucket list activity, because it opens up a world of possibilities. Learning to scuba dive then just enables you to do that in so many places across the world. So for me, the scuba diving trip in Gozo was a big bucket list dream, in the sense that it enables and opens up a world of adventure. And now, something I never thought I would really look into, I've now got a separate list going on of all the places that I would love to go and scuba dive. And I know that you've just released a Maldives liverboard. That was something that actually I had very limited knowledge about what a liverboard was. The diving element is more kind of you, I would say. Like, you've got the experience of doing all the diving and have spent a lot of time diving around the world. But now I've got a whole list of places that I would love to go diving to. So yeah, scuba diving as a general activity has gone quite high on the list.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we've talked so much about diving and, around adventure travel, and, what it opens up to you if you are a scuba diver. I know diving isn't for everybody. A lot of people can't dive, they've got sinus problems, whatever. But, if you are a traveling type of person and you love to travel, having your scuba diving license and having the ability to, go scuba diving wherever you are. And I know, last year you led the Thailand trip. A few people went in scuba dives while they were in Koh Lanta. You weren't qualified at that time, and quite rightly, you didn't want to take, you weren't on Koh Lanta for very long, and what you didn't want to do was go and spend 3 days while you were there learning to scuba dive. And that's why I came up with the Gozo trip, was because the whole point of the trip is to go and learn to scuba dive for those people who can. Obviously, it's not only open to those people, because as we've said on many occasions with the Gozo trip, if you are already a scuba diver, you can go and explore the underworld of Gozo. And it's just amazing. And yeah, I think the thing that surprises a lot of people is, a lot of people don't know where Gozo is. So Gozo is the sister island to Malta. And people have this preconception about Malta, about being, this tourist destination of packaged holidays. But Gozo couldn't be any further away from that, really, could it?
No, I was really surprised. I didn't know what to expect necessarily, because, although I know what happens day by day working here and what happens in Gozo, because I've not been, it was still something where I wasn't 100% sure what to expect in terms of going through like the little market areas and kind of the back streets of Gozo. And I was just really impressed, because again, you're right, you've got a preconceived conception of what Malta's like, and I think I did think that Gozo was going to be slightly similar, but it's just the most amazing island. And where we stay in Shlendi Bay, which is where you go out from quite a lot, is just a brilliant little seaside area. And that was really nice. So you'd go scuba diving during the day, and then we would go out for dinner in the evenings, and you've got a choice of all of these incredible places. And then, short drives to the other side of the island. We were going out and doing a little bit of wreck diving and going through some different places. So as I said, I think that has made its way onto being one of my top 5 trips, for not only being an incredible trip on its own, but also because it opens up a world of possibilities now. That when I go back to Thailand to take a group, I think I've got 16 people that we're going out to Thailand with this November. If I wanted to, then I could go diving. And you've nailed it. I wouldn't want to learn to dive in those places, because you'd spend so much time, not exploring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, do you know what? I think, if you're going and doing a Southeast Asia tour for 3 months, like so many people do on their travel bucket list, then, you can quite easily go and spend 3 days learning to scuba dive whilst you're in those destinations. But if you're only going on, a trip, say you're going to the Maldives, for example, you don't really want to spend 3 days while you're in the Maldives learning to scuba dive and doing all the theory and, spending your time sat at the bottom of at the bottom of the water in 5 meters. You want to be exploring it and seeing what you can see. So I think that's why that Gozo trip is so good for those people who have never dived before and want to learn. But at the same time, if you do want a relatively cheap dive holiday, then Gozo certainly gives you that opportunity. And it didn't make my list because I put the Maldives in my list, but I know Gozo made Dave's list and Gozo made your list as well. So, we are an adventure travel company. Like you say, we did start as with trekking, but as kind of, we've added more and more of these trips on, we've now sort of, there are now other activities within our trips. And, a lot of the destinations we visit, you can bolt on to go diving. I know Michael, one of our bucket listers, he came on the Gozo trip last year because he was going out to Peru and going to the Galapagos and wanted to go scuba diving in the Galapagos. So he used the Gozo trip to learn to scuba dive. And then, he's actually booked onto the liverboard trip as well now, and he loves diving so much. So, it does open up so much more to you when you've got your qualification. And I think, the thing with it as well is, like I say to people is, we give you the opportunity to do your open water course. Your open water course qualifies you down to 18 or 20 meters, depending on which agency you're doing with. But I would always advise people to continue on and get the advanced qualification as well, because that opens up to 30 meters or 35 meters, again, depending on the agency that you're doing it with. And, in a lot of places, if you are only an open water diver, then it kind of does restrict the dive sites that you can go and visit. And, the Maldives, for example, has a maximum depth dive of 30 meters for recreational diving. But obviously what you don't want to do is miss out on something because you can't go that extra little bit. So to do another course, and the advanced course is only 5 dives, you've only got to go and do an additional 5 dives. But my advice would be for everyone to get to advanced open water level, and that's across the board, across all agencies. So a lot of people think about diving, and obviously if you say scuba diving and you say qualifications, 9 times out of 10, most people will say PADI to you, because that's the one that, is kind of what a lot of people used to offer. If you learn to dive in the UK, then you might be under the British Sub-Aqua Club or BSAC. There's now also SSI, there's now also RAID, and it doesn't matter which qualification or which agency you train through. They are all accepted anywhere in the world. So we used to offer the PADI qualifications. Now we offer the SSI qualifications on our trips. And it doesn't matter where you go, just because you don't have a PADI qualification, it doesn't mean that you can't go diving anywhere, or, all dive centers will allow you to have any agency qualification. It's the open water or the advanced open water part. That's the bit. And you can also cross over as well. So if you've gone in, you did a PADI qualification 10 years ago, but you go to a dive center where they're now offering SSI or RAID, you can do an SSI or a RAID advanced qualification and have the PADI open water. So you're not restricted in that. And I know that question came up to me a while ago, so I just thought I'd clear that off then while we were chatting about it. Jake, number 3.
Well, number 3. So, the Bucket List Company started as more of a trekking-based company. It's now obviously gone more into adventure travel, and Gozo is a perfect example of that being kind of a great adventure travel trip. I would say that coming in at number 3 was Kilimanjaro for me. So going back to the trekking, going back to kind of what started, Kilimanjaro had always been on my list. And when I started kind of getting into this industry, this world, for me, it was all very much based around trekking. I've since, really started enjoying all of the other activities that we do and very much enjoying the adventure travel. But at the beginning, it was really based around trekking. Kilimanjaro was always going to be there as a big bucket list item for me. Being one of the 7 summits, that had huge appeal. It's just, I think for people wanting to get into high altitude mountaineering and maybe pursue other mountains, it's a great entry level. But what makes it a really good bucket list trip is being one of the 7 summits and also the culture around Tanzania and all the experiences that you get when you're actually in Tanzania as a country. We offer 2 routes that you can do Kilimanjaro with, the Marangu and the Lemosho. My favorite is the Marangu. I just happen to have a preference, having done it a couple of times now. But what I would say to people is, getting out and climbing Kilimanjaro is the big bucket list moment. How you go about it varies, but yeah, I would say that if anything like that is on your list, Kilimanjaro is fantastic.
I'd just like to say as well there, Jake, like we do as group trips only offer 2 of the routes as our standard group trips, but we have started sending more and more people up different routes because people have, they do their own research and they decide that they want to do the Northern Circuit or the Rongai, and we've sent more and more people on their own private trips as well now. So if it is that, you think I want to do Kilimanjaro, but I want to do the Rongai from the north, or I want to do the Northern Circuit, like we can still put that on for you. And we're doing more and more of those for people now as well, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the first time I ever climbed Kilimanjaro was a trip that I actually put together myself, and that was the Machame. So there's lots of different routes. There's 7 different routes up Kilimanjaro, and as you say, if the route is something that you've got in mind, that there's a certain route that you'd love to do, then do get in touch with us, because we have actually got a group, as you say, going out and doing the Northern Circuit. And there are other routes available, but the ones that we currently offer for group trips is the Lemosho and the Marangu. I do really like the Marangu just because, having done it in tents now on the Machame, I do really appreciate having a hut and just having the ability to have a bit more room, dry some clothes if you need to dry some clothes. It's still a challenging trip. But yeah, those little things I actually do massively appreciate now when we go back. In fact, in a couple of months or a few weeks almost, I'll be climbing Kilimanjaro again. We're going to do the Marangu route.
Okay, so what's on number 2 then? So we're getting down to the final 2 now. So which one? Obviously, this was the hardest one for me, working out which was 1 and which was 2. But where have you got?
This was really difficult for me as well, and it was a tough choice between the 2. But I've gone in this order. But again, that might change in 5 minutes. But I've gone in this order for now. Number 2 was Machu Picchu for me. Machu Picchu was something that I remember a couple of years ago. When I was doing a lot more work with the Bucket List Company, when I was still guiding exclusively, it was something where you said to me, "Oh, what's one of the trips that you'd like to do," or whatever. And I did say to you, I remember we were sat having a meeting, doing the rota, and I said, "Oh, I would like to do Machu Picchu. That's on my bucket list." So I went out and I got to do the Inca Trail. And having been there and done it, it just cemented it as being, one of the best trips for me. And just such an iconic destination. It really is bucket list worthy. It's become super well known as a bucket list destination, but by doing the Inca Trail, I got to avoid all of the crowds and all of the things that I really don't enjoy, and seeing them come up the next day. But yeah, the Inca Trail with its history, its culture, seeing so much along the way, and then ending up at Machu Picchu. It was just an incredible trip and had been on my bucket list for such a long time.
So you've just come back from doing the Salcantay trek to Machu Picchu. So why did you put the Inca Trail at number 2 over the Salcantay trek?
So the Salcantay that I just got back from was an incredible trip, and I really enjoyed being out in the mountains. As you can tell, from as we get further down the list, it becomes more trekking based. That is something that I do really enjoy, is being in the mountains. I picked the Inca because, and it does still remain my favorite route to Machu Picchu if you're trekking, just because I like the history and I like the culture. And as beautiful as the Salcantay Mountains were, or the Salcantay Mountain was, there's something about walking in the footsteps of the Inca and going along that historical trail and learning so much about them on the way to Machu Picchu that puts it above for me. I will say that, in my opinion, the Salcantay is more varied in terms of terrain. So you start with high mountains. You get to go to I'm going to butcher the name, but the Humante Lake. It's quite a difficult one to say.
Lake, yeah.
That's it. You get to go to the lake, and that's stunning. And then onwards through the mountains, up and over a pass, which is higher than anything you do on the Inca. Tipping it into 4,600 meters, I believe. So it's quite high. But actually then on the next few days, you come further down, you get more into the jungle, you get more into more of a tropical zone, and you get to see more wildlife. So there's quite a mix of terrain doing the Salcantay, but I just really like the history and the culture associated with the Inca Trail. And that's the reason that it's above the Salcantay for me.
What about the steps?
Well, the steps I don't mind, actually, and it's something that a lot of people it's kind of burned into their memory after going and doing the Inca Trail. And when people say, "Oh, should I do the Inca?" and I say, "Well, do you like steps?" Because you are going to be doing so many steps, and you've got some really famous moments on the Inca Trail that everybody will be aware of. You've got the Dead Woman's Pass that you go up and over, which is your high point at 4,200 meters. That's always a big day for people. It's the first taste of being at altitude to that level while you're out there. And that's a big day. And then you've got the Gringo Killers, or the Gringo Killer, which is just this section of steps that winds its way down through the jungle. And it's really hard to explain to people what they're like. But they're just these traditional Inca steps that have been carved out of rock into the side of this jungle mountain path. And it's all worn away over time. So they're really slippery when it's wet. And they're incredibly steep and designed for much smaller feet than I've got. And it's just, it's a really memorable moment. It's great fun, but it's a challenging day. And then the final one is the Monkey Steps, which is as you're approaching the Sun Gate to get your view to Machu Picchu from above. You've got these Monkey Steps, and they're called the Monkey Steps because you would need to use both your hands and your feet. Sometimes those are a bit more confident. I say to people, try not to use your hands. But it's that steep. It is more like a ladder. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of steps along the Inca Trail. But I personally don't mind that when I'm hiking. I don't mind steps.
I know Dave, struggles with his knees a little bit, and he would not do an Inca Trail trek again for us because, the steps are, if you've got any problems with your knees, then I would certainly suggest looking at one of the other two routes. But I completely get why you put the Inca Trail up there, and it's another reason why, there are other routes to Machu Picchu. We do 3 different routes to get there, but we still sell more Inca Trail treks than anything else because the Inca Trail is so iconic. And I completely get why people want to do it.
I think that is exactly right. It's just so iconic. Like, it's so famous and it's been written about in so many books, and it's so classic, and it's what everybody hears about, that it was really great to experience it. To show you how much I don't mind steps, I wouldn't say I love them, but I don't mind them, is that the last time I went on the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, because I'd already visited Machu Picchu and I'd done the tour, I had 2 people on the trip who had also been to Machu Picchu previously with us, and they decided to do a different route. They'd done the Salcantay, and then they were coming across to do the Inca. So the 3 of us actually then went, we hiked up the monkey steps, we went down, we went into Machu Picchu, and then while everyone else went to go and do the tour, we actually did Huayna Picchu at the back. And that's something that you can bolt on if you've done Machu Picchu before. So if you have done a trip with us, you can look at doing Huayna Picchu instead of touring around Machu Picchu again. But that's just basically the monkey steps for 2.5 hours to get you to the top. It was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. And that in itself was a huge highlight for me this year. But yeah, lots and lots of steps. But if you've done Machu Picchu, if you've done the Salcantay and you fancy doing something different, think about bolting that on. So we do get people that come back and do Peru and Machu Picchu twice.
Okay, then. So I didn't know what your list was. We hadn't discussed your list beforehand, but I reckon I've got a inkling then of what's going to come in at number 1. And I think we discussed the country at the start of this podcast when we were discussing India. Am I correct?
I believe you are correct. My memory is really, really bad already. I can't quite remember what you said. But
we were discussing Kathmandu in Delhi.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. The top bucket list destination for me is Everest Base Camp. It is Nepal. It's going to Everest Base Camp. Again, very personal for me why Everest Base Camp goes to the top. It's something that was always on my bucket list. I think it's what I associated a bucket list with. I think, for me being, I think back to when I was quite young, I always had dreams and ambitions of climbing Mount Everest. So I always associated hiking to Everest Base Camp as, like, when people spoke about a bucket list, what are things that you would love to do, that was always up there. And when I got the experience to go there for the first time back in 2019 now, it was everything that I thought it would be. It's not the easiest trip. There's definitely challenging moments. I've been lucky enough to go back, I think, 5 times now. And I still find it challenging on certain days. You go, yeah, that was a really, that was a good day's walk. That was a long day hiking, but it was always quite satisfying. But the key things that stand out for me, which make it such a bucket list trip, is one, the fact that it's so iconic, similar to the Inca Trail. There's so much that has been written about Everest and Everest Base Camp. I really like my history. That's a bit of a recurring theme. You feel like you're walking in the footsteps of these really great explorers. And I love stuff like that. I'd read a lot of literature that had been written around Everest Base Camp. So I had this picture in my mind. So getting to stand at the base of it and looking up and knowing all of these things, that was a really big thing for me. Then there's also just the sounds and the smells and the sights of prayer flags, and the dalbat and the momos that are being cooked in the tea houses. Like, I love all of that. And then another one for me, actually, that fits in, which I just think is so cool, is I watched a film, which some of you might have might have seen. And if you haven't seen, I would massively recommend you go and watch it either before you go to base camp or afterwards. And it's 7 Years in Tibet. You seen that, Keith, with Brad Pitt? Great film. There is the scene where he first goes into the Tibetan monastery, and they've got the big sound of the of like the big gongs going off, and they've got the drums, and you know that soundtrack of the horns and the drums and everything. Very, very classic and Tibetan. Well, the last time we were in Nepal and on the way to Everest Base Camp, we went to the Tengbache Monastery, which is really famous. And we were there at the same time that the monks were chanting the mantra, and they had one of the guys was blowing the horn, and there were the drums going off, and it was exactly like I was in the film, and it gave me goosebumps, because you've got the Himalayas right outside the window. You're in your down jacket because it is a little bit cold. And you've got these Tibetan monks chanting. You've got the drums going off, the trumpets, the horns being blown. Like, it was a really surreal experience. But yeah, for me, it's always going to be. I think it's always going to be number one is being in Nepal and hiking to Everest Base Camp, because it's just what I associate a bucket list with.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's all about emotions on the trek. And like, the whole thing about Everest Base Camp is the journey. For me, it's not necessarily about Everest Base Camp. It's about everything from flying into Lukla to trekking up through, like you say, the Tengbache Monastery, getting to the memorial. That's always somewhere that I, been there so many times, but every time I go there, it just makes you really think about everything when you're up there. Just being there is just, the thought of what you're there for, the thought of why the memorial's there for all those people who have, haven't come back. But also the celebration of everyone that's gone through there in, what they have achieved as well. And then getting to Everest Base Camp, and, we've got a video of Everest Base Camp of when I did a trek there. And I just remember, like, in that video that's on our website, of, everyone coming in and hugging when they've got there, and just that emotion of that journey, because it takes so long to get there as well compared to other trips. I think it's, people are spent by the time they get to Everest Base Camp. Like, that walk through the boulder field to get to Gorik Shep, and then that last long trek to get from Gorik Shep to base camp. And when people get there, they're just like, the emotion just comes out when they're there, because they just want to get there and look at that view. And, let's be honest, the view from Everest Base Camp of Everest is one of the worst views of Everest you can get. But yeah. That's not the point of the whole journey. And that's the thing, I think, is, you don't go to Everest Base Camp to look at Everest. You go to Everest Base Camp to say you've been to Everest Base Camp.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a funny one, because the last day on the journey to Everest Base Camp, so that last day where you hike from Lobuche to Everest Base Camp and then back to Gorik Shep, that is my least favorite day and my favorite day. Like, it's really bizarre because as you say, you get all the emotion of, as a group, you've been through this journey, you've been through this experience. By that point, there will have been something that you would have found very hard. Like, it might have been a certain day on the trek. Potentially you might have gotten a bit ill. Maybe you were just feeling quite cold. There's probably something that, and I'm not saying that you're really going to struggle, but there's probably something that you had that you struggled with a little bit. So it's quite an emotional experience to be there. Everyone's hugging each other. Everyone comes together, and that's really, really nice. But at the same time, and this is why I say to people, like you've said, enjoy the journey, is because actually the last day is probably the most barren. You go through the boulder field.
It goes on and on and on.
It is really.
Then you turn around and you've got to walk back through it again. Like, it is just.
It so long, and then a kilometre from Gorik Shep into the next boulder field is just all sand, and it's really open, and like, anyway, I'm making it sound awful, but that last day is the least, in my opinion, the least scenic, the least cultural, the least all of that sort of stuff. But that moment where you get to base camp, it's that feeling of achievement. And also because there's a part of me that, again, I love the fact that I've walked in the footsteps of so many of these amazing people. Like that's something that's a really big selling factor for me. And it's both the end of a journey and also then the start of a journey for a lot of people. And I find that quite cool, that for us, we're hiking to base camp, and that's a really emotional moment because that's where it, ends for us, and then we'll make our way back. But for a lot of people, that's where it's just getting started. And then they've got this whole journey to look forward to. But I think you're right. Like, a lot of this comes down to the way that these trips make you feel. And Everest Base Camp is always going to be really special for me because of the way that it makes me feel. But the whole list that I've spoken about, I mean, India, Gozo, like, they're adventure trips that are just, I love the activities that we do on those trips. I love the fact that we go and see tigers. I love the fact that we do whitewater rafting. Like, that's all really cool. But Everest Base Camp, for me, it's about the people and the experiences that you have along those lines. You're not doing high adrenaline activities on the way to base camp. you are hiking to base camp for 9 days. But it's the people that you meet in the tea houses. It's experiencing all the coffee shops in Namche, the Irish bar. It's the people that you bump paths with, all that sort of stuff. That's why it makes it such a good trip for me. And I do try and go back once a year. That tends to what I try to do, just because I really love it. And once you've been to these destinations before, going back, although there's so many things to go and see, but going back, you see it with a different, like, almost through a different lens. And lots of people have said to me, don't you get bored doing the same trip again and again and again? And I always say no, because it's the people, and it's either the people that I have on the trip that make it a different experience every time. And it's also the fact that it's the people that I get to see in the tea houses and in the cafes and in the bars who I won't have seen for a year. And then you get to catch up with them. So that's always a really cool thing for me.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, like, what I say to people about going back and doing the same trips over and over again is your delight as a tour guide, tour leader, expedition leader, whatever it may be, is seeing other people achieve their dreams. Now it's, I've achieved mine. Like, it's about knowing that you've been part of taking them there and seeing them achieve what they've set out to achieve. Yeah, massively. Like, I actually do get a little bit emotional when I get to Everest Base Camp, when I get to Machu Picchu, Kilimanjaro, like, all of these trips where people really get to, like, achieve something that has been, on their mind for so long. I mean, the effort that people put in to getting to base camp is monumental. In that journey, I only see people on that journey for 2 or 3 weeks, but that might have been going on for 2 or 3 years of training. And then, maybe it's a 25, 30, 40-year-old dream that these people have had, for as long as that. And it's really emotional because suddenly this dream that you've had for however long it is, and all the effort that you've put in, you've achieved, and you're all hugging and you're all celebrating. And I said it on my trip just gone to the Salkantay. But what makes me really, really happy on trips now is seeing other people happy. And actually, because the first time I do any trip, it's really special for me because I get to experience that place for the first time. But actually now, when I go back to Everest Base Camp, although it's still special for me to see, and I still love the place and I love the destination, I actually get more satisfaction out of helping other people achieve their bucket list dreams, if that makes sense. Yeah, completely. And just finally on Everest Base Camp, then, you put Everest Base Camp at number 1, just as Everest Base Camp, or with Gokyo as well? So, that is tricky because I loved doing the Gokyo Lakes when I went to go and see it. I think, okay, I'm going to say that just Everest Base Camp goes down as my number 1
bucket list trip, because I believe that, in my opinion, the journey to Everest Base Camp was so iconic for me. However, if you want to make it better and you want to get more out of the country, then by adding things on like the Gozo Lakes or Island Peak, if you're more of a climber and you want to go and summit something, or even the Chitwan Safari at the end, those are all ways to make what, in my opinion, is the ultimate bucket list trip even better. But I would say at its core, reaching Everest Base Camp, in my opinion, for me, is the ultimate bucket list trip.
There we are then. So there are Jake's 5 top bucket list trips that he has done with the Bucket List Company. And there's quite a bit of crossover there between mine, Jake's, and Dave's, to be fair. I had done Everest Base Camp was on my top 5. And Kilimanjaro was in my top 5. So there's a little bit of crossover there between mine, Jake's, and Dave's, but there are plenty of other trips there. I think if you looked, I can't add them up in my head that quickly, but probably we got to about 12 trips between Jake, myself, and Dave that were in our top 5 trips between us. Hopefully you have found this chat with Jake inspirational in terms of thinking about what can be on your bucket list. Now, obviously, we are all in very fortunate positions that this is our job and we get to go to these destinations. So we know how hard it is for people to tick off their bucket lists. And as it is for both Jake, myself, and Dave, they're ever increasing with new destinations coming on them as well. So it's always hard to tick off your bucket list. But as we say to people, like, you need to start somewhere, and just getting out and getting those trips ticked off your bucket list, the sooner the better, in our opinion. Before we sign off for this week's podcast, if you could all do us a favor and go and give us a great review in a lovely 5-star tick within Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that would be absolutely amazing. Because it really does help the podcast grow and get it put in front of more and more people. The more reviews we get, the more 5 stars we get, certainly does help the podcast grow. And that's kind of what we wanted to do. Obviously, we are a very small podcast at the Bucket Lister Podcast. And, we're not one of the big boys, and your help could really help us out here, get in front of more people. People tell us that they like listening to it. So we just want to give more people the opportunity to find us and hear all about the amazing places we visit at the Bucket List Company. But hopefully, like I said, you've enjoyed this episode, you've taken something from it, and hopefully one of Jake's 5 bucket list trips has made its way onto your bucket list. And if we can help you tick that off, then please head over to the website, and I will put links to all Jake's 5 trips into the show notes. So just click on the notes on the podcast and you can go and see those itineraries and see the dates we have planned for those trips. But that's it from this week's Bucket List Podcast. We'll be back next week with another episode where actually I'm going to be chatting with Jake again, all about his recent trip and going more in depth into the Salcantay Trek. So until then, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.